Good morning, Aldersley. Hope you had a lovely bank holiday weekend. This morning we're talking all about scientific discoveries in the Assembly. Last week's challenges set by Miss Huntington were to look at the differences and diversity in people, to look at the way they dress, to look at the way they act, eat, think and speak. Did you do that? Did you get out and on your exercise? Did you have a look? Lots of you will already know about all those differences, but have you thought about those differences? Have you thought about them in terms of celebrating and how good it is that there's so much difference in the world, and how much more interesting the world is, and how people can bring such a different perspective to things if they've got a different background, if they've got a different religion, a different culture. Have you thought about your friends with all those different backgrounds, and how it makes your life better, how it makes lots of people's lives better, that there are those differences that we can celebrate. Shout outs. Here is some of the week's great works on Twitter at the end of last week. Mr. Edwards over in DT, some fantastic knowledge retrieval. I know it's something that they're working on very hard in DT knowledge retrieval. If you've forgotten it, did you learn it? So knowledge retrieval helps us to not forget, it helps us to remember all of those key bits of information useful for the rest of our lives. Fantastic work from the mathematicians of the week there. They got tweeted out. They were on the Teams chat, which is fantastic. Well done to all those people. Million Year 8 smashing it, Mr. Lane's lesson. Fantastic piece of work there. Really detailed. Tweeted there by Mr. Lane. And then the merge cube, hopefully making its way to printers all over Wolverhampton at the moment, as you print out the PDF that was left on Teams by Ms. Thompson, and you are printing out your merge cubes. You're using the app and having a really great time exploring all things like space systems and hearts and animals and so on, using that merge cube, using that augmented reality. Action calendar, Meaningful May 2020. So today is the 11th of May on the Monday. What are your most important values? Think about using them today. So if we're talking about kindness, for example, if that's one of your most important values, if being kind is really important to you, how you have a think about how you're using those in your day today. So today we're talking about, in this part of the assembly, talking about scientific discoveries. Now, as I've told some of you in assemblies before, science is more of a process than a sort of big book of facts. The big book of facts, as it were, has been arrived at through this process, and it's pretty much the same pattern, that scientists have an idea, we call it the hypothesis, and then they go and make observations, or they carry out an experiment to see if their idea is right. They might use a telescope to look at space. They might carry out an experiment on some chemicals or some viruses or bacteria. They might carry out those experiments, and then they will put up, through peer review, they will put up their findings to other scientists, and those other scientists will complete the same experiment. So if I've got a great discovery, I call my friend in Japan and I say, can you give this a go? Well, not quite. What happens is that it goes to something called a journal, and the journal decides on who will be the people who will do the experiment in another part of the world, or who will try and replicate your findings, and that will get published if they can. And even then, once it's been published, if people can't replicate your findings, then it will lose credibility, and quite a few scientific discoveries have fallen by the wayside like that. Most famously, the idea that MMR vaccines cause autism and so on, which was done on a really small number of people, 20 people, which is far too small to avoid random effects. And so that was quickly discredited, and that was a big hit to the reputation of the journal that published that. Okay, so once you've got the scientific method, you can discover new things, and we're going to talk about how viruses were discovered since it's very topical. Now, viruses are very small. They infect all types of organisms, and if you were to look in seawater for them, you'd find there were billions of them in every single litre of seawater, a fact not known until really quite recently, and lots of scientists were very, very surprised to find that there were billions of them in every litre. In 1897, they were named, but they were known to be much smaller than bacteria, because what scientists were doing was they were looking at something called tobacco mosaic virus, and they noticed that if you took if you crunched up a leaf and if you poured the leaf's sap into another leaf, you could infect another leaf using the sap. And while scientists knew about bacteria, they didn't know about viruses. So they couldn't really say what was causing the infection, because when they filtered the sap, they couldn't see any bacteria left behind. And so it was much later, in 1935, when the experiment was pretty much repeated, but this time the sap was crystallized and they were able to actually isolate the virus. So it's not been very long really that we've known about viruses, but viruses have been around since pretty much the time when life first started on Earth. So for a long time there's been these organisms which have been killing people, killing plants, killing animals, that people have not been able to see what the cause was, be able to see these silent killers. So moving on then, thinking about how science will discover a vaccine, there are currently approximately 200 separate attempts to find a vaccine across the world, and using all different kinds of ways of doing that. One of the most common ways of doing it is taking advantage of the fact that the outside coat of a virus tells your body that it's an invader and it shouldn't be there, and your body will use the outside shape to figure out ways of fighting the virus. Now, a lot of the time, the virus will change its shape a little bit, called a mutation, and that gives you different infections. So, that means that each time the cold virus changes a little bit, you get a new cold virus and you get a cold yet again, even though you've had lots and lots of colds in your life. Now, a vaccine would work. One way it would work would be crippling the virus so it couldn't get inside your cells and start replicating itself and making you sick that way. But just crippling it so that your body could learn the outside shape of the virus, so that when a non-crippled virus came along, your body will already have produced chemicals that it can use to help fight the virus, give it a head start. And lots of you will have had vaccines in the past, and they will have protected you from lots of other types of viruses. But one of the things is we'll need to be very quick on this, because the coronavirus might well mutate and there might be lots of different forms, and it might even be the case that people might have to have coronavirus shots like we have flu jabs, where we think about what kind of strain is coming up this year. So there's lots and lots of work going on there to try and discover a vaccine. What might that look like? The absolute best case, we were skipping lots of steps in the process that are normally used to make vaccines safer, would be the end of September. There's one lab in Oxford that, if everything goes absolutely perfectly, thinks they could have it ready for the end of September. More likely time frame, since the coronavirus has been going for about sort of 6 months now, 12 months from now would be a much more likely time period. So lots of discovery, lots of hard work going on the coronavirus, and stay tuned into the news to find out how the scientific community is discovering how to cure this problem for us. And just think where we would be without science in this case. Just think about just how many people would be getting infected and would be dying if we didn't have a scientific approach to this. Think about how people would be behaving. Think about eventual lessons in history about the plague and so on. And think about where we'd be without all that scientific effort. So today's challenges, I would like you to go and discover something new. Go for a walk, take your time to look around you and see what's changed or what you've never noticed before. Take a look on TED Ed and learn something new, or cook a meal that you've never cooked before. As always, tweet us at Aldersley High School to let us know, because we love finding out what you guys are up to during this lockdown time especially. And don't forget on the action calendar your most important values. Go and use them today. Have a lovely day, Aldersley.